My name is Rachel Kim. I'm 36 years old. And today, I drove home to a house that forgot who I was. It had been almost 6 years since I last set foot in my parents' driveway in the quiet suburbs of Redmond, Washington. The cherry blossom tree I once climbed as a child still stood stubbornly in the front yard, though its blooms were long gone. My palms were sweaty on the steering wheel, not from fear, but from the familiar ache of walking into a place that once called itself home, yet never truly accepted who I became. In the backseat of my car, zipped inside a black garment bag, was the dress uniform I had earned through 17 years of military service. My colonel insignia gleamed beneath the fabric, silent proof of a life my family had never understood or even tried to. To them, I was still the daughter who gave up on a real career, the one who ran away from law school offers, the one who chose something unconventional and therefore, in their minds, unacceptable. I parked slowly, exhaled sharply, and stepped out. The house looked exactly as I remembered. White siding, dark green shutters, a porch swing my father once fixed for my mother's birthday. Even the welcome mat with the faded live, laugh, love print was still there, curling at the corners. I knocked out of habit, even though I had a key. My mother opened the door seconds later, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her expression hovering somewhere between polite surprise and cool indifference. "Rachel," she said with a tight smile, "you made it." "I said I would," I replied simply. She stepped aside to let me in, offering no hug. The scent of soy, ginger, and lemon filled the house. Her signature marinade for grilled chicken, something she always made when she wanted things to look normal, even if they weren't. Inside, everything was unchanged. Same beige walls, same framed pictures from 2 decades ago. My high school valedictorian photo still hung in the hallway, right next to Kevin's first place science fair ribbon and his MBA diploma from Stanford. My own accomplishments, of course, were absent. "Your brother just texted," Mom said as she returned to the kitchen. "He and Emily will be here soon. Kevin was promoted again last month. He's leading the cybersecurity expansion now. Quite impressive." I nodded. Good for him. Her smile warmed at the mention of him, an effortless pride in her tone that had never once been used when talking about my work. "You're still in Texas, right?" she asked vaguely. "San Antonio," I replied. "Hide. Joint base." She nodded as if that meant nothing. "Still flying back and forth all the time, I assume. Must be exhausting." "It's part of the job." "Hmm." She turned her attention back to the oven. I left my bag by the staircase and walked slowly toward my old room. It was still exactly how I left it at 20. Floral bedsheets, high school cheer trophies, shelves stacked with books I once adored. Not a single trace of the life I built after. No photos of me in uniform. No news clippings from military journals. No mention of the cybersecurity task force I led, or the operations I'd managed overseas. In their minds, that version of me didn't belong here. I sat down on the edge of the bed, running my fingers over the threadbare quilt my grandmother had sewn. It struck me that this room had been frozen in time, like a memory my family refused to update, as if admitting I had changed would somehow erase their version of who they wanted me to be. But tomorrow, they would have no choice. Tomorrow, Atlas Technologies, the very company where my father and brother worked, would host its annual Defense Innovation Summit. What they didn't know was that I, Colonel Rachel Kim of the United States Air Force, would be attending as the Pentagon's liaison. And this time, I wouldn't be asking for their recognition. I'd be commanding it. The dining room looked smaller than I remembered. Maybe it was the years I'd spent in aircraft hangars, command tents, and concrete bunkers that made it feel that way. Or maybe it was the weight of unspoken things that seemed to crowd the air between us. My father sat at the head of the table, still dressed in his crisp white shirt and navy blazer, sleeves rolled just enough to show the gold watch he always wore when he wanted to project confidence. He glanced up as I entered the room and gave me a curt nod, not warm, not hostile, just neutral. "Rachel," he said, "welcome back." "Thanks, Dad." Across from him, Kevin sat with his wife Emily. He looked every bit the part of a young executive, polished, self-assured, the golden child in full bloom. Emily offered me a genuine smile, and I returned it. She'd always been polite. Even when the family dynamics turned sharp, we began to serve ourselves. Mom passed the salad bowl to Kevin first, and I could already hear the gears turning. She was setting the tone. Polished silverware, perfect napkin folds. Control. So, Kevin, she began brightly, tell us more about the project you're heading. Didn't you say you're working directly under the CTO now? Kevin chuckled modestly. Yeah, it's pretty exciting. We're piloting a new network infrastructure for military-grade systems. It's part of that big government contract Atlas just landed. I took a slow sip of water. Oh, yes, Dad added, beaming. That contract is a game changer, billions in funding, and Kevin's team is right at the center of it. Emily touched his arm, glowing with secondhand pride. Sounds like a huge responsibility, I said evenly. Kevin shrugged like it was nothing. We've got good people. Besides, I'm used to pressure. Shannon Murphy personally requested me to lead the integration group. I knew that name. CEO of Atlas. And tomorrow morning, she'd be standing across the table from me. That's impressive, I said, keeping my tone neutral. And you? Dad turned to me. Still, what was it, logistics management? The words dropped like a stone between us. Close, I said. Cyber operations and infrastructure defense. I oversee military-grade systems at a strategic level. He blinked once. Oh, so admin work? I smiled. Something like that. Kevin cut in, chuckling. Must be nice to have a stable government job. No shareholders breathing down your neck, huh? It has its perks, I replied. No one asked for more detail. No one ever had. Mom redirected the conversation toward Emily's new real estate venture and Kevin's recent business trip to Tokyo. Every time I opened my mouth, the subject shifted, like I was invisible at my own welcome dinner. You know, Mom said, cutting a slice of roasted chicken, it's really wonderful to see Kevin doing so well. It's exactly what we always envisioned. Her gaze flicked to me. And it's never too late to pivot back to something more structured, Rachel. You still have your degree, after all. It took everything in me not to laugh. I had led joint cyber defense operations across 3 continents, sat in rooms with generals and intelligence chiefs, briefed Congress behind closed doors, and here I was being told, at 36, to consider finding a more structured career. I'll keep that in mind, I said quietly. The rest of dinner passed in a blur of small talk and suppressed frustration. I answered questions politely when asked, never corrected their assumptions, never revealed the truth. They didn't know that the contract Kevin bragged about? I was the one overseeing it. That tomorrow, at precisely 9:00 a.m., I would walk into Atlas Technologies not as Rachel, the drifter daughter they tolerated, but as Colonel Kim, the officer with final authority on the company's most valuable defense deal in its history. That moment would come, but for tonight I let them talk. I let them believe. Because sometimes in Manu's teens, silence isn't weakness, it's strategy. Later that night, after the dishwasher hummed its quiet lullaby and my parents retreated to their room, I stood alone in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by relics of a girl I barely recognized. My old debate medals still hung above the desk. The faded varsity cheer jacket remained folded in the closet. My acceptance letter to Columbia Law School, once proudly displayed, was now tucked behind a framed photo of Kevin delivering his commencement speech at Stanford. I slowly unzipped the garment bag. The scent of starch and discipline filled the room as I pulled out my Air Force dress blues, midnight blue fabric, pressed to perfection, polished metals catching the light, and at the collar, the silver eagle insignia of a full colonel, earned just 3 months earlier, after leading a multi-agency task force that dismantled a hostile cyber infiltration ring targeting U.S. satellites. A position achieved faster than any officer in my branch's modern history. I traced the insignia with my thumb, feeling the cold weight of it anchor me. I hadn't told anyone in my family about the promotion. Not because it wasn't worth celebrating, but because, deep down, I already knew the silence that would follow. The awkward nods, the quick changes of subject, The "but what about law school" looks. No thank you. My validation hadn't come from them in years. It came from standing in briefing rooms with Joint Chiefs, from watching my algorithms intercept foreign threats before they touched American soil, from the deep, steady voice of General Adrienne Lee, the woman who had once told me, after a brutal cybersecurity drill, "You don't just follow the book, Rachel. You write new chapters." She had become my mentor, my advocate, my family when mine stopped looking. It was General Lee who had nominated me for the role I now held, Department of Defense Liaison to Atlas Technologies, overseeing Project Sentinel, a $1.4 billion initiative to secure the digital infrastructure of military drone fleets, the very project Kevin had been bragging about at dinner. Tomorrow, I wouldn't just be attending the Defense Innovation Summit. I'd be leading a closed-door review session, evaluating performance metrics from every project lead, including Kevin. And yes, I'd be sitting across the table from Shannon Murphy, the formidable CEO of Atlas Technologies, who once called me a rare intersection of tactical genius and systems insight. None of them, my father, my mother, Kevin, knew, because they'd never bothered to ask. They'd never wondered why I moved so often, why I rarely posted anything on social media, why I missed 3 Christmases in a row. They assumed I was still doing desk duty in Texas, maybe writing reports, maybe pushing paper. They had no idea that I once helped shut down a cascading ransomware attack that nearly crippled NORAD, or that I'd been on a no-sleep emergency call with Pentagon officials the night Russia tried to backdoor our comms grid. Instead, they clung to the story they had always told themselves, that Rachel was smart, sure, but scattered, that she never quite lived up to what she could have been. But I had lived up to something, just not the version of success they'd prepared for. I folded the uniform carefully, slipping it back into the garment bag. The house was quiet, save for the gentle tick of the hallway clock and the muffled creak of floorboards settling into the night. As I lay in bed beneath the same floral comforter I'd had at 16, I stared at the glow-in-the-dark stars still stuck to the ceiling. They'd dimmed over time, but they were still there, like me. They didn't shine because someone clapped or noticed. They shone because that's what they were made to do. I didn't need an audience tomorrow, but I would have one anyway. And when I walked into that boardroom, flanked by my rank, my experience, and my purpose, my family would finally see me for who I'd always been. Not the disappointment, not the dropout, not the drifter, but Colonel Rachel Kim. And this time, I wouldn't be shrinking to fit their version of my story. The sun had barely risen when I woke. Military training dies hard, even in your childhood bed. By 05:30, I was up, pressed, and methodically pulling my hair into a regulation bun. The house was silent. No smell of coffee, no sounds of early breakfast. Just the ticking clock in the hallway, marking time like it always had, even when no one noticed. I opened the closet and took out the uniform. Every pin, every ribbon, every bar told a story. Sleepless missions, near impossible deadlines, split-second decisions that had saved systems, and sometimes lives. I inspected it carefully, pressing each fold, smoothing each line. This wasn't about vanity. It was about presence, command, accountability. By 06:15, I was fully dressed. The colonel's insignia gleamed at my collar. I descended the stairs quietly, not wanting a scene. Not yet. My family wasn't expecting me at the conference. They assumed I'd be spending the day sightseeing, or maybe tagging along to lunch. They didn't know I was scheduled to brief half the executive board at Atlas Technologies by 09:00 sharp. They didn't know I had arrived last night with more authority in that building than either of them ever had. Their cars were gone. They'd left early to prepare for the big day, probably hoping to make a good impression in front of Shannon Murphy and the Department of Defense team. Funny, they didn't know I was the DoD team. I stepped outside and climbed into my rental. The morning air was crisp, Seattle's skyline just beginning to glint in the distance. The 30-minute drive to Atlas passed quickly. I used the time to mentally review project specs, recent risk assessments, and security compliance metrics. There would be no room for personal history in that boardroom, only performance. When I pulled into the Atlas parking structure, the digital sign above my space read, "Reserved, DoD Liaison." A small, quiet smile tugged at the corner of my lips. I took the elevator up to the executive floor. A few heads turned as I stepped out, my uniform catching the light. Conversations paused. One man straightened his tie. Another whispered something to a colleague who then immediately looked in my direction. I knew what they saw. A woman. In full dress blues, with the unmistakable eagle insignia of a U.S. Air Force colonel. Someone not to be underestimated. As I turned the corner toward the main conference room, I nearly collided with Kevin. He looked up from his tablet and froze. His eyes widened, first with confusion, then with disbelief, then something closer to panic. "Rachel?" he asked, blinking. Why are you dressed like that?" "Good morning," I said calmly. "I'm here for the Sentinel review." His mouth opened, then closed. Behind him, our father appeared, deep in conversation with two mid-level executives. He noticed me, his sentence trailing off as his eyes locked onto my uniform. He blinked, brows furrowing, then his posture stiffened. "Rachel," he said slowly, "what's going on?" "I'm heading into the conference room to prepare," I replied professionally. "The meeting starts in 15. "But," he glanced around, voice dropping to a near whisper, "why are you in uniform? What are you doing here?" Before I could answer, a woman in a gray blazer strode down the hallway. Tall, poised, unmistakably in charge. "Colonel Kim," she said, smiling as she extended a hand. "I wasn't expecting you in person." "What a surprise." "Ms. Murphy," I returned her handshake firmly. "I had family in town, thought I'd drop in and conduct the review myself." She nodded, clearly pleased. "Your presence will definitely keep the meeting focused." She turned toward the group. "Everyone, for those who haven't met her, this is Colonel Rachel Kim, Pentagon Liaison for Project Sentinel. She holds final authority on all phases of development." Silence, then whispers. My father's face turned a shade I hadn't seen before. Somewhere between pale and flushed. Kevin looked like someone had just pulled the floor out from under him. I offered a polite nod and stepped into the conference room, letting the door swing quietly shut behind me. No theatrics, no speeches, just presence. For the first time in my life, I wasn't asking my family to see me. I was simply letting them. The room buzzed with quiet anticipation as executives and project leads filtered in. Each seat was marked with name cards. Mine at the head of the table, just to the right of Shannon Murphy. I took my place, opened my secure tablet, and began reviewing the agenda. The staff offered coffee, pastries, fruit platters, none of which I touched. Not out of pride, but out of focus. Today wasn't about pleasantries. It was about performance. One by one, the attendees introduced themselves. Some had met me before via secure video briefings. Others only knew me by name from internal documents. But every handshake carried respect. That kind of silent weight that only comes with reputation. Kevin and my father sat near the end of the table, noticeably quiet. Kevin stole glances toward me, trying to reconcile the Rachel he thought he knew with the officer seated before him. He wasn't alone in that. At precisely 9 a.m., Shannon cleared her throat. "Good morning, everyone. Before we begin, I'd like to thank Colonel Kim for being here in person today. Her leadership on this project has been pivotal. She'll be observing the review and offering direct feedback on implementation strategy and risk compliance." All eyes turned to me. "Thank you, Ms. Murphy," I said, standing briefly. Project Sentinel is a critical initiative to national security. My presence today isn't ceremonial. I'm here to ensure every component, every decision meets our strategic and cybersecurity standards. I'll be asking direct questions and requesting clarification where necessary. I trust that won't be an issue." Heads nodded. A few backs straightened. The first few presentations went smoothly. Data architecture, preliminary threat modeling, hardware integration timelines. I took notes, asked questions, approved contingencies. Then Shannon glanced down the table. "Kevin Kim, you're up." Kevin stood. His voice was steady at first, polished like a practiced executive. "Our team is responsible for user interface integration, ensuring compatibility between existing military command systems and the Sentinel software environment. I've led a team of 14, including senior engineers and civilian consultants." he went on, showcasing wireframes and dashboard logic. To a casual observer, it might have sounded impressive, but I wasn't a casual observer. I saw the gaps immediately. When he finished, I offered a slight nod. "Thank you, Mr. Kim. A few questions." He stiffened, then nodded. "Of course." I projected a diagram from his slides onto the screen. "This UI module here, your report claims it can support dual authentication with biometric fallback. But the latency tolerance outlined exceeds military protocol by nearly 50 milliseconds. That's not negligible in a real-time field setting. Explain your mitigation strategy." Kevin hesitated. We're still testing fallback environments. The initial simulations suggest..." I cut in. "Initial simulations aren't field conditions. You're deploying this to high-threat areas. Delay under fire is unacceptable. Revisit the load distribution model. Use the Air Force Tier 2 protocol as a benchmark. You'll need revised specs by Friday." He blinked. "By Friday?" "That's correct." A beat passed. Shannon didn't interrupt. No one did. "Understood," he said quietly. I turned another page. "Also, your redundancy plan lists server mirroring across 3 data centers, but no mention of ComSec overrides. That's a compliance risk. We can't sign off until that's addressed." Kevin's jaw clenched. He gave a slow nod. The rest of the room sat in rapt attention, not because it was dramatic, but because this was business, real oversight, and I wasn't speaking as Rachel, the daughter or the sister. I was Colonel Kim, and this was my domain. When the review session ended, Shannon stood and addressed the group. "Colonel Kim will be on site tomorrow to conduct facility inspections. Please make yourselves available for any follow-up she requires." She turned to me. "Colonel, thank you for a productive session." "My pleasure." As the room began to empty, Kevin lingered. He didn't say anything. But as I gathered my notes, I glanced up. Our eyes met. No smirk, no smugness, just a quiet recognition. He finally saw me. Not as competition, but as the standard. The hallway outside the conference room was quiet. Most of the team had returned to their departments, whispering their amazement about the day's revelations. I heard fragments as they passed. "She's the colonel? That was her brother? No wonder Shannon deferred to her." But I wasn't focused on them. I was focused on the 2 men standing at the far end of the corridor, my father and Kevin. They hadn't left with the others. Kevin stood stiffly by the window, arms crossed, staring at nothing. My father leaned against the wall, his face pale, eyes distant. The man who'd once told me over dinner that ranks don't mean anything in the real world now looked like someone who'd seen a ghost. I approached with steady steps, every inch of me still in uniform, pressed, proud, unapologetic. They turned when they heard my footsteps. "Rachel," Dad said first, trying to summon the warmth he hadn't offered in years. Or should I say Colonel Kim? I didn't flinch. "Whichever you're more comfortable with. Though out here, most people go with the one I earned." He gave a weak chuckle, but his eyes didn't meet mine. Kevin broke the silence. "You've been in charge of this project the whole time?" "For the past 6 months," I confirmed. "I was promoted shortly before that. My clearance level changed, so did my jurisdiction." He shook his head, more at himself than at me. I don't even know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," I said evenly. "That's the difference between today and every other conversation we've had. I'm not looking for permission or praise. I came to do my job." My father straightened, a flicker of defensiveness rising. "You could have told us, Rachel." "I did, multiple times," I replied, my tone never rising. "I called, I emailed articles. I invited you to ceremonies, you never showed. And after a while, I stopped expecting you to." He blinked, as if that possibility had never occurred to him. "I didn't know how far you'd come," he said quietly. "You didn't want to know," I corrected, "because it didn't fit your definition of success, because it wasn't law school or a VP track, because it wasn't Kevin." Next to him, Kevin shifted uncomfortably. "I was just doing what I thought I was supposed to," he said. "School, promotions, following the plan. I didn't realize how much of your life I was being measured against." I looked at him for a long moment. "It's not your fault. It was never a competition, except to everyone else in the room." The air grew heavy with what hadn't been said for years. Finally, my father stepped closer. "You were impressive today." "Thank you," I said, "but I wasn't trying to impress you." He nodded slowly. "I know. That's what made it sting." There was no malice in his voice, just a quiet grief for a relationship he had neglected long enough for it to harden. My father had spent his life climbing ladders, mentoring men like Kevin, training the next generation of executives. But when his daughter chose a ladder he couldn't see, he assumed she'd never climbed at all. "I misjudged you," he admitted. I exhaled slowly. "Yes, you did. I don't expect you to forgive that today, or maybe ever. But I'd like to try again, as a father who listens, not just one who expects." His words caught me off guard. Not because they were grand, but because they weren't. They were real, stripped of pride, of image, of narrative. I looked between the two of them, my father, humbled for the first time, and Kevin, unsure but no longer smug. "I have a security debrief in 10 minutes, I said. "But after that, I'll be around." Dad gave a quiet nod. "I'd like to hear more," Kevin added, "if you're willing to talk." For the first time in years, I felt something ease in my chest. Not closure, not yet. But the door was no longer closed. And that was something. I got back to the house a little after 6 p.m. The sun had dipped low, casting golden light through the front windows of my parents' home. For once, I didn't dread walking through that door. Not because everything had changed, but because for the first time, something had. I stepped inside quietly. My dress uniform was still on, though I had removed the name tag and medals for security protocols. Just the fabric and the rank remained. I expected silence. What I found instead was my mother in the living room, holding a photo frame in her hands. It was dusty. Old, but familiar. My commissioning ceremony. It had been tucked away in a drawer for years, one she had probably opened that morning looking for extra guest towels. She didn't look up when I entered. Her eyes stayed fixed on the image of me in uniform, fresh-faced, newly pinned, standing between two empty chairs where she and Dad should have been. "I forgot we even had this," she said softly. I stayed by the doorway, giving her space. "General Lee sent it," I said, "after the ceremony. I thought maybe you'd want to see it." She finally turned toward me. I didn't understand what it meant. Any of it. ROTC, cybersecurity, active duty. It all felt so far from the life I imagined for you. "I know," I said. "You imagined something safer, simpler, something you could explain to the neighbors." A corner of her mouth lifted, sad, but not angry. "That's not wrong." She placed the frame on the mantel, beside Kevin's graduation portrait. For the first time, both of us were up there. "It wasn't that I didn't care," she said, turning to face me. "It was that I didn't know how to care for something I didn't understand. And instead of learning, I stayed quiet. That was my mistake." I didn't say anything for a moment. I let her words sit. Then I nodded. "That's more than I expected you to say." Her shoulders softened. "Dinner's almost ready," she said after a pause. "I wasn't sure what you'd want, so I made your favorite. Kalbi short ribs and ginger rice. Thought you might be craving something real." "I'd love that," I said quietly. We sat down to eat, just the two of us. No comparisons. No comments about what I could have been. Just food and the silence between us filled with something warmer than awkwardness. Maybe the start of understanding. Halfway through dinner, the front door opened. My dad stepped in, briefcase still in hand. He looked tired, but not distant. "Smells good," he said. "Mind if I join?" We made room for him at the table. There wasn't a grand speech or apology, just him asking, "How was the security walkthrough?" and actually listening to my answer. He didn't interrupt, didn't dismiss. Kevin arrived 20 minutes later, out of breath, carrying a bottle of wine he clearly picked up on the way. Didn't want to show up empty-handed. he said sheepishly, setting it on the counter. My mother raised an eyebrow. Since when do you bring wine for dinner at home? Kevin chuckled. Since I figured I'd be the least impressive person at the table. I gave him a look, unsure if he was teasing or trying. He held up his hands. I mean that respectfully. Dinner resumed. It was awkward at times, but lighter than usual. My parents asked questions. Not the right ones, not always, but they tried. They asked about my role, what a typical deployment looked like, how cyber defense works in the military. I answered, surprised at how good it felt to explain, not to impress, but to simply be known. After dessert, as we cleared the plates, my dad hesitated near the hallway. I cleared off the shelf in the study, he said, looking at me. If you have any awards or recognitions you want to display, there's space now. It wasn't much, but it was more than I'd ever had. I nodded slowly. Thanks, Dad. He gave me a small smile. It's about time we catch up to who you've become. And for the first time, I believed he meant it. The next morning, the house was quiet again, but not cold. The tension that used to hang in the walls like old wallpaper had faded slightly, replaced by something gentler. Maybe it was the conversation over dinner, maybe it was my photo finally sitting on the mantel, or maybe it was just time, long overdue. I had just finished packing up my uniform in the garment bag when I heard a knock on my door. Come in, I called. Kevin peeked in, still in his usual polished dress shirt and slacks, but his expression was softer than I'd seen in years. He looked less like the smug little brother I remembered, and more like someone trying to understand something for the first time. Hey, he said. Morning. You got a minute? Sure. He stepped in, hesitated, then sat on the edge of the chair by my desk. The same chair he used to steal when I was in college, just to annoy me. I read your white paper, he began. The one you published last year, the adaptive encryption system you designed for the Navy? I raised an eyebrow. You read a military white paper? He chuckled. Well, I tried. Half of it was over my head, but I got the big picture. That system is incredible. Thanks. I didn't realize, he paused, choosing his words. I didn't realize you were doing that kind of work, like game-changing level work. I leaned back against the dresser. No one in the family ever asked. Yeah, he admitted, looking down at his hands. That's on us. There was a long pause before he spoke again. You know, when you asked me that question yesterday in the meeting, I wasn't just caught off guard because it was you. I froze because I didn't have a real answer. You exposed something I missed, something important. It's not about catching mistakes, Kev, I said. It's about knowing when the stakes are too high to let things slide. He nodded slowly. I get that now. Honestly, part of me was embarrassed. And the other part, I waited, was impressed, he finished. Not just at what you knew, but at how calm you were, how you handled everything. You were in control, like you'd done this 100 times. I have. He looked up at me, a little awe in his eyes. I always thought I had the tougher job, more pressure, bigger expectations. But after yesterday, I don't think I could do what you do. You don't have to, I said gently. You're not supposed to. We're in different lanes, different missions. He gave a small laugh. That's the first time you've ever said that without sounding defensive. That's the first time you've ever said something without making it a competition. Touché. He nodded again, more seriously this time. I want to understand more about your work, about the systems you're building, about you. That hit harder than I expected. For so long, I had stopped hoping for that kind of curiosity from my family. I had made peace with being a mystery to them. But now, my brother, once my rival, was showing up as an equal, not in rank, but in effort. I'd like that, I said. There's a lot I can't share, but what I can, I will. Kevin stood up, then did something I hadn't seen him do since we were kids. He opened his arms and hugged me. No jokes, no sarcasm. Just a brother finally seeing his sister. Not for what she gave up, but for what she built. As he stepped back, he added, Oh, and the team took your feedback seriously. We already started refactoring the interface models. I grinned. Told you. Tier 2 protocols don't play around. He mock saluted me with a smirk. Yes, ma'am. Then, more sincerely, see you at the office? Yeah, I said, but don't expect any special treatment. Wouldn't dream of it. As he left the room, I looked around one last time. Same walls, same furniture. But something was different now. I wasn't shrinking to fit into this house anymore. And maybe, just maybe, it had started growing to make space for me. Later that afternoon, I arrived back at Atlas headquarters, not in full uniform this time, but in a tailored blazer, plain slacks, and my military ID clipped to my collar. Still recognizable, but softer. I wasn't there to command a room today. I was there to meet someone who never needed convincing. General Adrienne Lee was already waiting in the executive conference lounge. She stood by the window, arms crossed, eyes locked on the skyline, like she could see through every cloud and challenge between here and DC. Colonel Kim, she said, without turning. General, I replied, smiling. She glanced over, and a rare warmth flickered across her face. You survived the summit, she said. I take it your family didn't implode? No explosions, I said. Just a few internal rewires. She chuckled and gestured for me to sit. Good, because your performance yesterday? Surgical. You held your ground, made your point, and still left the door open for growth. That's leadership. I sat across from her. You taught me that. She nodded once, sharp and certain. I saw it the day you stood your ground during that red team exercise in 18. Everyone else was scrambling to follow protocol. You rewrote the damn protocol on the spot. I had no choice, I said. You had instinct, she corrected. And now you have experience to match. We sat in companionable silence for a moment. Then she added, You know, you didn't need to show up yesterday in person. You could have stayed a mystery. I know, I said. But it wasn't about being seen. It was about standing in the room where the decisions happen and owning the authority I've earned. General Lee leaned back in her chair, studying me. Funny, she said. That's what your father was trying to do all these years. Stand in the room, make his voice matter, and for a long time he thought you were on the outside looking in. I let that sit for a beat. And now he knows, I said quietly. I was never outside. I was building the room. She smiled again, this time with something close to pride. You've made your mark, Rachel. Not just in code or contracts, but in how you carry yourself. And for what it's worth, I think your family finally sees it too. I hope so, I said. But even if they don't fully understand, I do. And that's enough, yet we stood. Before leaving, she placed a firm hand on my shoulder. Your path wasn't traditional, it wasn't easy, but it was yours. And no one can take that from you, not even the people who love you the wrong way. That landed hard and true. As she walked away, I stood by the same window where she'd been moments earlier, looking out over the city. My reflection stared back, not the version of me that once craved approval, or the one who minimized her worth to keep the peace, but the one who had become exactly who she was meant to be. Not for validation, not for applause, but for purpose. And finally, the room I built was filled with people who saw me, not as a daughter, not as a sister, but as Colonel Rachel Kim, on my terms. 6 weeks later, my parents came to visit me in Washington, D.C. It was their first time seeing my world, the one beyond holiday dinners and polite phone calls. They stood in my apartment looking around as if trying to piece together everything they'd missed for the last decade. The awards lining my bookshelf, the framed commendation from the Pentagon, the clean, minimalist decor shaped by years of living with only what I could carry. My mom brought homemade mandu. My dad brought silence. At first. But it didn't last. This is impressive, he finally said, standing in front of the photo of me and General Lee at the Project Sentinel launch. I didn't know the Air Force gave medals for cybersecurity, he added. I smiled. They do when it works. That made him laugh. We had dinner together that night. No tension, no side comments, just real questions, real conversation. And before they left, my dad did something he hadn't done since I was 12 years old. He saluted me. It wasn't ceremonial, it wasn't performative, it was respectful, it was real. A few days later, I found myself back in uniform, standing before a group of young officers at a leadership seminar. They were sharp, eager, ready to prove themselves in a world that still doesn't always know how to value quiet excellence. One of them asked, "Colonel Kim, how do you stay motivated when people underestimate you?" The room went still. I thought of every dinner where my name was skipped over, every "but why the military" conversation, every celebration I had to attend alone. And then I looked that young officer in the eye and said, "You don't serve to be seen. You serve because you know who you are, even when no one else does. And if you keep doing the work one day, they'll stop asking why. They'll start asking how." My name is Colonel Rachel Kim. I'm not the person my family expected me to become. I'm better because I chose to walk a path they didn't understand until they couldn't ignore it. And the truth is, I didn't need their approval to succeed. But I won't lie to you. It felt good when it came. Not because I needed validation, but because I had finally earned something much more meaningful: respect. Not for what they thought I should be, but for who I actually am. So what about you? Have you ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to know you best? Have you ever had to build yourself in silence until your success made the noise for you? If this story spoke to you, don't keep it to yourself. Hit that like button, subscribe for more stories like this, and tell us in the comments, when did you finally earn your place at the table? Because you don't have to shout to prove your worth. Sometimes all you need to do is walk into the room and let them see what they missed.